all the time. Just
Hello, and you are all very welcome to the Science Gallery online event, An Air of Positivity, where we're going to be taking a look at the issue of air quality and the reasons that we have to be optimistic about progress being made all around the world. My name is Daniel Murray, and I'm a reporter with the Business Post newspaper here in Ireland. And I'm joined today by a fantastic panel of speakers, including John Haynes from the NASA Earth Science Division, artist and inventor Robin Price, and Tara Shine, who runs a sustainability consultancy in Ireland called Change by Degrees. We're going to get to proper introductions and meet our panel shortly, and we'll also be taking questions from viewers throughout. So if you have a question, please leave it in our comment section below the live stream, and we'll get to them towards the end of our conversation. We're bringing you this discussion as part of Earth Day 2020 on the 50th anniversary of the annual event. Earth Day was established in 1970 in the United States as a means of drawing attention to the condition of our planet and our relationship with it. 50 years later, Earth Day is now a global affair, and ordinarily there would be events and rallies happening all over the world. But this year we find ourselves in a very different set of circumstances, as the spread of COVID-19 has prevented people physically gathering together. However, like ourselves, online events and discussions are being held globally to raise awareness about our planet at what is a critical juncture for the environmental movement. Today's discussion is taking place as part of a one-year partnership between Science Gallery Dublin and the US Embassy in Ireland. We are also bringing you this discussion as a sister event to the Smithsonian Earth Optimism Summit, which has a full schedule of online discussions available on their website at earthoptimism.si.edu. Earth Optimism celebrates a change in focus from problem to solution when discussing environmental sustainability. So in that spirit, we're going to frame today's discussion on air quality around the progress that has been made, the incredible tools that are available to us, the increase in public awareness and education, and the practical ways you can contribute to improving air quality wherever it is that you live. But I want to start today with a couple of stark facts about air pollution before we discuss reasons to be optimistic. The World Health Organization, whose authority we have all become very familiar with during this pandemic, estimates that air pollution results in over 7 million premature deaths worldwide every year. From smog hanging over our cities to smoke inside our homes, air pollution poses a major threat to our health and to our climate. More than 80% of people living in urban areas across the globe are exposed to air quality levels that are deemed unsafe, with low and middle income countries suffering the highest levels of pollution. So what can be done and what is being done about it? Well, joining us for today's discussion, we have a brilliant panel who all have extensive expertise in this area, and they're tuning in from various parts of the world. First of all, joining us from Washington, D.C. is John Haynes. John is a program manager for health and air quality applications with the NASA Earth Science Division. John has received several awards during his tenure at NASA, and he comes to us today with a fascinating insight into space technology that allows us to measure different air pollutants back here on Earth. Also joining us is Robin Price, a Belfast-based artist and inventor, transdisciplinary physicist, musician, and a self-described cat enthusiast. Robin's background in both science and art has led him to create some really stunning and interesting work, including an exhibition that has endeavored to make the invisible visible by demonstrating the pollutants that exist in the air we all breathe in. Finally, joining us from Cork in the southwest of Ireland is Tara Shine. Tara has more than 20 years experience working at the highest level on climate policy, from her work on the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change negotiations to her time advising Mary Robinson on climate justice. Tara now runs a sustainability consultancy business called Change by Degrees with her colleague Madeline Murray, where they help organizations and individuals get to grips with environmental sustainability. You're all very welcome, everybody. And I want to start with you, John, if I can. And most people, when they think of NASA, they wouldn't think of air quality. So what kind of work do you do at NASA to measure air quality?
Well, thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure being here. And thank you so much to Trinity College for hosting this event. And happy Earth Day to everybody. Yes, as Daniel said, I am in the NASA Earth Science Division at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. And in NASA Earth Science, for us, it all begins several hundred kilometers above our head. with our fleet of over 20 Earth-observing satellites and sensors that are continuously monitoring Earth's weather, climate, and environment for research and applications purposes. This constellation of Earth-observing satellites represents an investment of 2 billion, that's billion with a B, US dollars per year by the American government. And along with a very robust international contribution to that constellation, it represents the largest Earth observing satellite constellation on the civilian side of the coin anywhere on the globe. This satellite constellation is literally downloading terabytes of data each day to ground stations across the world to allow researchers, end users, stakeholders to be able to monitor how our Earth system is dynamically changing. And several of those satellites are dedicated to looking at air quality and air pollution and how it's changing across the globe and how it's transported across the globe. Two very important instruments that I'll be talking about in several of the questions coming up today that I'll just mention here are one, the ozone monitoring instrument, OMI, that's on board NASA AURA. The OMI instrument is actually a Dutch and Finnish contribution to the NASA AURA spacecraft. As its name suggests, the ozone monitoring instrument looks at ozone across the world, but it looks at a lot of other pollutants too, including nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide. Also, on board two of our spacecraft, NASA Terra and NASA Aqua, we have an instrument called the Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectroradiometer, or MODIS. You can see why we like acronyms at NASA, because that's a mouthful. But MODIS is a very important workhorse for the constellation. It looks at the Earth in over 30 different wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum, all the way from visible to infrared. And one of the important air quality products we get from MODIS is called aerosol optical depth, which is actually measuring the amount of particulate matter in a column of the atmosphere. And through that data, we can use that as a proxy for particulate matter 2.5 micron observations across the globe. And PM 2.5, as it's known, is a very dangerous pollutant. The particulate matter is so fine that it gets very deep in people's lungs, causing inflammatory responses to the respiratory and circulatory system. So that's just a couple of examples of the types of observations we're getting across the globe and have been collecting for the past several decades. And my job is to get that data into the hands of end users and stakeholders in the health and air quality community, both domestically here in the United States and globally, so that they can make better forecasting and policy decisions when it comes to issues surrounding air quality and human health.
Robin, you have worked using art and technology to help bring the issue of air quality to new audiences. Can you tell us a little bit about the projects you've worked on?
Yeah, so I did a residency at a gallery in Birmingham called Birmingham Open Media that specialise in art, science, technology crossovers, where they partner an artist with a scientist. So I worked with Professor Francis Pope from University of Birmingham, and sort of together we developed a system for visualizing air pollution through experimental photography. So I worked with PM 2.5, which is the metric John was talking about there, which is the particulate matter smaller than 2.5 microns that gets lodged in the lungs. So I would go out to various locations around the world wearing this on my arm. It's just like a little PM 2.5 sensor, so it would suck the air in on that side, shine a laser through that column of air, and then work out by looking at the light that was scattered back what the PM 2.5 content was, and then use that data to control a load of LEDs on a big stick, on a big like 3.5 meter stick, and they were twinkling on and off very quickly. And I was taking a long exposure photograph and walking in front of the camera. So those sort of twinkling lights would appear as specks in the final photograph. And the way I programmed the bit that was controlling the LEDs was the more particulate matter the sensor detected, the more specks of light it would draw into the final photograph. So the idea conceptually was that it was making, it was as if the air was being put under a microscope and lit up, so you could see the invisible air pollution that was there.
When you put the experiment together, what did you see? Was it when you visualized it, were you able to see quite a high level of PM 2.5?
Well, the thing with these sorts of projects is you've got kind of a free hand. Like I can make you can make it look however you want. So when I went out, the first place that I went, was the most polluted city in the world at that point, which was Delhi, just after they had the really bad smog in 2017, I think. So that was the upper bound, if you want. Like, you weren't going to find anywhere with worse PM 2.5 air pollution there. So I gauged it all off that. So that became the most densely populated photographs in terms of, sort of specks of light were always going to be there. And it did, I mean, it knocked off the chart what I'd previously sort of flown out there thinking I would sort of, visualize it with, because it was just so, it was so bad at that point. And it was weird because the smog had lifted, so visibly it didn't look as bad as it did. I was there in December and the smog had been in November, but the particulate levels was still sort of incredibly high. The toxicologist we were there with said that it was same as smoking 2 packets of cigarettes a day in terms of sort of health effect.
Yeah, and I think we regularly see in the news now headlines from Delhi at the levels of air pollution over there. It's still one of the most polluted cities in the world. They can see. Yeah, well, sure, as a lot of places are.
Yeah.
And Tara, your business, Change by Degrees, deals with a host of different environmental issues. Tell us what it is that you do and why air quality is important to your work.
Thank you, Daniel, and happy Earth Day, everybody. Yeah, in Change by Degrees, we're all about making all these complicated environmental issues accessible and understandable to everybody. And part of that is making it personal. And air quality is a fantastic example of where people are sometimes not completely informed about the impact that the air that's all around them is having on their health. So it's a really good example of the environment and how the environment is in influencing our health as human beings. And so, we really enjoy being able to bring facts and figures to people. Like, for most people don't know that over 1,000 people, close to 1,200 people, die from air pollution related respiratory disease every year in Ireland. Yet last year I checked, and the numbers from road traffic accidents, for example, were much lower than that, at 148 people dying per year from road traffic accidents in Ireland. And we see lots and lots of publicity and advertising and public awareness raising around road traffic accidents and telling us how we can take care of ourselves and reduce risks. Yet we don't see that in relation to air pollution. And so what we want to do is we want people to know where are these sources of air pollution? Where is it that we are putting this waste into our environment? And a lot of those things, a lot of the sources in Ireland in particular are from things that we as individuals have power over. So it is from the cars that we drive and how we heat our homes. So if we're driving diesel cars, we're putting out a lot of this particulate matter that everybody's been talking about, this PM 2.5, but also things like nitrogen dioxide, which is a really potent greenhouse gas. And then the other way that we're contributing to it is when we light a fire in our home. And in Ireland, we have a great cultural attachment to being able to light a fire in the evenings, on the cold winter evenings. Yet what we don't know quite often is that it's contributing both to indoor air pollution in our homes and to the pollution in the air outside as well. So yeah, I love being able to bring facts to people in a way that engages with them emotionally and helps them to take an action and to tell others what they're doing.
And Tara, what actually is air pollution? It's not just the one gas we're talking about. You've said there's different sources there, but there's obviously different gases. So we have to measure them and assess them differently. So what actually is air pollution made up of?
So air pollution comes from the waste we put into our environment. So some waste we put in our environment ends up in the water. We call that water pollution. The waste that goes up into the air out of chimney stacks primarily, or out of exhausts, that's air pollution. So if it comes out of a car exhaust, probably it's going to involve things like nitrogen dioxide. As I say, that's a greenhouse gas as well as an air pollutant. So it's causing climate change and air pollution. If it's from our fires or anywhere where we're burning biomass, so whether that's coal, turf, wood, all of these things, they all give off particulate matter, these tiny little particles, which others have explained can lodge in your lungs and give you a greater predisposition to respiratory problems, but also stroke and heart attack. And then there are other things which have also been mentioned, like sulfur dioxide, which would come more from our industrial processes. And then one that people often don't know about is that agriculture is also a source of air pollution, because the ammonia, which is in the slurry that we spread on the ground to fertilize it, also gives off quite dangerous and potent air pollutants. So it's a whole range of sources.
Okay, and even with those different sources, I presume because of the density in urban centres that it is our cities that are the worst affected.
It is, yeah. Our cities are worst affected. The more congested parts of our cities tend to be where we see the highest levels. We're starting to monitor that more. We still could do with a lot more monitoring in Ireland and right across the world. So to have more monitoring stations regularly collecting the data so we can see where the peaks and troughs are and attribute that to different causes.
Okay, well, we've heard a lot of anecdotal reports as a result of the COVID-19 shutdowns around the world of air pollution dropping. But John, you actually have been looking and monitoring through your satellites in NASA. So what have you seen in the last number of weeks in relation to air quality?
Thanks, Daniel. Yes, globally, we have seen a very large reductions in air pollution, the types that were just being discussed, as economic lockdowns have been rippling across the globe because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Going back to the instruments I was mentioning earlier, for example, the ozone monitoring instrument that I mentioned looks at nitrogen dioxide that again comes from the processes that was just discussed and is a very potent pollutant as well as a precursor to ozone development as well, which is another dangerous pollutant to breathe here at nose level. It's a very important gas to have in the stratosphere where it protects us from UV rays. It's a very dangerous gas to have down here for ourselves to breathe. So from the NASA ozone monitoring instrument, we can look at NO2 worldwide. We can also use instruments like TROPOMI, which is a European Space Agency instrument, to also look at NO2 levels worldwide. And as these lockdowns have been occurring, we've seen very large reductions in NO2 from a year ago, 2 years ago, going back in time. First seeing that in China, as the pandemic began there in January, and now seeing it rippling across Europe and North America. In fact, if the folks watching would like to go to our website, it's airquality.gsfc.nasa.gov. And there you can see images from OMI and the European Space Agency's TROPOMI looking at the changes, particularly over the northeastern corridor, the very heavily industrialized northeastern corridor of the United States, from Washington, D.C., New York to Boston. And you can see how large of a reduction in pollution there has been in those areas. Of course, unfortunately, this has come at a terrible economic price worldwide.
And John, would you say that the vast majority of that reduction has come from reduced traffic on our roads?
It's come from, yes, reduced traffic on our roads is certainly a large reason for that reduction, but it's also a reduction in industrial output. And as was mentioned, a lot of the air pollution comes from factories that are no longer in operation because, again, the workers have had to be sent home and put into lockdown. Or businesses have had to close. So certainly, those two are the biggest contributors to the change: the vehicular traffic and also industrial output slowing dramatically.
Okay, Robin, as we hear there from John, this reduction has come at a huge economic price, even though it may be a positive thing that we have cleaner air out there. Is there anything that we can learn from the current situation, or anything that we should try and perpetuate and make sure that air quality doesn't deteriorate again afterwards?
I think home working's starting to look a lot more tenable now as a sort of a way of conducting business. I don't think no one's sort of clamoring to go back to the way things were afterwards. So I think there will still be meetings, and I look forward to all of that happening again. But I think that we'll be more open-minded around working from home more, because we've seen that it can work. So that's a positive. I think the other things that we'll learn, they'll probably be harder to tease out, because like indoor air quality is a big question, especially in the global north. But the sort of studies that we would do around sort of health effects of what's the effect of people being sort of cooped up like this on the air quality they've been experiencing would be very difficult to tease out from the effects of the pandemic. So we'll not know what happened there.
Yeah, and much harder to gather that data, I would imagine. Tara, we see initiatives now happening in different European cities, certainly Milan and Brussels, to try and ensure air quality doesn't deteriorate once lockdowns are lifted. Should we all be looking to try and take this opportunity to permanently improve air quality in our urban centres?
Yes, I think absolutely. And it's in our self-interest to do that. So if we care about our health, this is a really important thing to do. New research that's emerging from Europe, looking at 4 European countries, Germany, Italy, Spain, and France, has found that 80% of the COVID-related deaths happened in the most polluted parts of those countries. So if you live in a polluted part of the world, you are already more prone to respiratory disease, which in this case has made you more vulnerable to COVID-19 and to having a bad outcome if you were unlucky enough to contract COVID-19. And as I say, you know, respiratory disease isn't just diseases of the lungs; it also affects your heart and all kinds of other elements of our health. So absolutely, it's in our self-interest. And it's interesting, whilst you see that Milan is going to keep 35 kilometers of their streets pedestrianized right over the summer and perhaps longer, because they're starting to see the benefits of having a less congested city, and people have seen it up front and up close and personal. In the UK, some of the local authorities that were about to bring in more stringent measures around congestion zones and clean air areas are putting them on hold because they feel that their capacities are needed elsewhere in responding to the COVID crisis. So this is the crux of the matter. Right now, in the middle of this emergency, is the time when we need to put in place the policies and measures that we can to make sure that we emerge from the COVID crisis with a better basic standards of health for everybody. And a huge thing we can do around that is to reduce how exposed people are to air pollution.
Okay, well, I want to talk a little about the importance of optimism in this debate. And Tara, you're the perfect person to talk to about this because Change by Degrees, you managed to take a very optimistic and proactive approach to environmental issues. So what reasons do we have to be optimistic when it comes to the air quality issue? And do you have any examples of positive initiatives that you've come across?
Absolutely. So I think for any of us at the moment who are not cocooned and who are lucky enough to be able to go outside, we will really appreciate the value of a walk. We will realize now that a walk to the shop with your backpack on your back to get your groceries is a pretty amazing thing, and it's a pleasurable thing. So I hope that one thing we will do is hold on to some of these new habits that we have created, but then expand them and start to test, for example, having pedestrian days in our city. So the city of Bogota in Colombia every Sunday shuts down huge tracts of the inner city and hands those streets back over to the people. And people walk, they cycle, they have parties, fiestas, music, everything they want to do on these streets, and the streets become something for the people again rather than something just for cars. So experimenting with that type of thing, whether you're in a massive city like Bogota or in a small town like Kinsale where I live, I think there might be more appetite for that in the future. Other reasons to be optimistic are last year in Ireland, you'll have noticed that there was a campaign to try and stop cars idling at school gates, because people suddenly realized that they were walking their kids in and out of school past car exhausts that were just the same level as their kids. And so they were exposing their kids to the maximum level of air pollution twice a day going in and out of school, plus everybody else by association. And so just getting people to turn off their cars or park at a greater distance from school and walk has had impacts already in those localities in bringing down levels of air pollution. And if we were apply the same to buses, to lorries that are unloading freight in one way or another, it would, again, small things, but real reasons for optimism that would bring down the levels of air pollution around it.
And what about from a policy perspective? Has there been any progress in Ireland in terms of policy around banning certain pollutants or around banning certain polluting behaviour?
So in Ireland, we have a national clean air strategy almost ready to go since 2017. We just need to take it, dust it off, update it, and publish it. And that would do things like ban the use of smoky coal right across the whole island of Ireland. In fact, it would be brilliant if it just banned coal altogether. Unfortunately, bad news for people in the Midlands, a lot of whom are still quite reliant on turf for heating their homes. Up to 30 to 40% of people in the Midlands are still burning turf as a source of heat. That we really have to stop doing that, both for air pollution reasons and climate change reasons. So enacting this clean air strategy that we've been working on for years would be a really powerful thing for our new government to do as soon as they are formed.
Okay, John, over in the United States, is there an equivalent of a clean air strategy, and what progress has been made on the policy front when dealing with air pollution?
Yes, it's a happy coincidence that not only are we celebrating here in the United States, as everyone across the globe is, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, we're also celebrating here in the United States the 50th anniversary of the Clean Air Act signed by President Nixon in 1971. And we have seen a lot of positive progress thanks to the regulations under the Clean Air Act here in the United States. That, once again, we can see the changes from orbit, from our satellites. Over the last 15 years, those observations, again, from the NASA Ozone Monitoring Instrument, looking at nitrogen dioxide, for example, over the last 15 years, we've seen 30, 40, 50%, up to 50% reductions in the amount of nitrogen dioxide across metropolitan areas of the United States. And that is a huge good news story that needs to get out there. And that is because it didn't happen by accident. It was because of the regulations under the Clean Air Act, the stricter vehicular mileage restrictions we have on cars for gas efficiency. It happened because of our switch from dirtier fossil fuels to more clean burning natural gas into renewable energy. In fact, the reductions have been so dramatic. As I mentioned earlier, nitrogen dioxide is a precursor to ozone formation. In the United States, in the major cities, we have something called red alert days for ozone, that when ozone levels exceed a certain a rate, in particularly the summertime, certain restrictions go into play where, for example, public transportation becomes free to encourage people to stop driving their cars. When I first moved here to Washington, D.C., more years ago than I like to remember, but back in 2002, we were having red alert days for ozone in this city several times a summer. We have not had a red alert day for ozone in Washington, D.C. in 9 years, since 2011. That just speaks to itself of the amazing positive progress that has been made thanks to the Clean Air Act in this country.
And John, what would be the main source of ozone gases?
Well, ozone, what I mentioned as far as when we're looking at NASA, uh, we're looking at ozone, not nitrogen dioxide as a proxy for ozone, because nitrogen dioxide is a precursor to ozone. So when you have high levels of nitrogen dioxide, and particularly when you get into warmer temperature environments, chemical processes happen where ozone is formed. So that's why you particularly see the high levels of ozone being formed in the summertime and being exacerbated in the cities due to the urban heat island effect in the cities. So that's where the primary it comes from, is from the nitrogen dioxide production from cars being driven, breaking down into ozone.
And Robin, you have traveled throughout the developing world where we see particularly poor air quality in big urban centers. Do you have any examples of positive initiatives or reasons to be optimistic about progress being made on air quality there?
Yeah, I was involved in a couple of interesting things. So there's UN Habitat Agency did a placemaking activity in both in Nairobi and in Kampala. I went to Kampala and took photographs there. And they pedestrianized a part of the city and were able to demonstrate a lowering in air pollution as a consequence of that. And that was part of a sort of a whole awareness raising campaign to sort of sensitize the public about sort of issues around air quality and health, and the things that could be done to sort of positively change that, around introducing cycle paths, popularizing cycling, pedestrianisation of public spaces, and increasing public transport. And there was clearly an aspiration for cleaner cities in Africa. And then more recently, I did a project taking more photographs in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, and they were then used on bus terminals, sort of try and raise the issue of air quality and how public transport is a way of improving it. And they were also used as postcards for a letter writing campaign to encourage people to write to the sort of legislative agencies to try and improve the laws around air quality. So there are reasons to be cheerful.
Okay, that's interesting because it does bring up the point about the importance of being able to communicate what are quite complex scientific issues to the public so that they can be empowered to make their own individual decisions. How important for you is using art or alternative mediums to communicate complex environmental issues such as air quality?
I think art doesn't change the world, but it can sort of change people, and people can change the world. I think it creates a space for a conversation to happen, and it can sort of help lodge things in the mind in a way that sometimes a statistic or a piece of sort of dry text doesn't. So it can help sort of connect at a more emotional level to then sort of create things that happen, sort of filter on and percolate and happen afterwards.
Okay, and do you think authorities, whether they be governments or whether they be environmental protection authorities, need to engage in kind of more creative ways of actually communicating these issues to people?
I think it's useful in terms of sort of politicizing it to the point where it becomes an issue that people will vote on. Yeah, I do think that.
Okay, great. And John, do you think public awareness and education about air quality has grown over the years in the United States?
Oh, it most certainly has. When we are going out to public events across the country and the world, there's a display that we use. We call it the NASA Hyperwall. And it's basically this huge HD screen that shows these beautiful animations of observations of our planet that we are collecting from our satellites, including air quality changes across the globe. And when you show these images to the public and show them how our air quality is getting cleaner in the United States, they get really excited. And the visualization really brings it home to them, because we're talking about the very air we breathe and its direct impact on personally their health. And they can see through these global satellite images the air getting cleaner across the United States, and knowing that that is because of the work under the Clean Air Act. But also they get excited because it has happened at the same time that we have grown our gross domestic product, we have increased our population, and actually the number of vehicle miles driven have increased. So you can have a clean environment, and you can have a strong economy, and you can protect your health. And when you lay that out, particularly in beautiful visualizations from orbit, boy, it really hits home to folks, and they get really, really excited. And we do these presentations across the nation, across the world. As I mentioned, in fact, today being the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, we were supposed to have a huge celebration at NASA, at the United States' Union Station in Washington, D.C., which is one of the main train stations of the Northeast Corridor. Unfortunately, that's not able to happen in our pandemic, socially isolated world. But I would encourage people to Google NASA Earth Day at Home. So it'll be the first thing that pops up if you Google NASA Earth Day at Home. And we have a lot of virtual events and activities online at that web portal for children of all ages, as we like to say, to help celebrate at home with your families this milestone event.
Okay, Tara, on climate change, air quality is a proxy often for similar issues to do with climate change, but climate change can be more difficult to communicate to people sometimes. Do you think air quality maybe is a vehicle to be able to communicate the issue of climate change through, because it impacts so much more directly on our health?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are very few people on Earth, very few people out there who are motivated by a desire to protect the environment, to look after Mother Nature. But people are very motivated to look after their own health. Whether that's they don't want secondhand smoke, whether they want to make sure that they're eating well, that their nutrition is good. We're much more motivated to change our habits and our behaviors if we have a concern for our own health or the health of a loved one. So absolutely, it has great advantages. And luckily, a lot of things that we can do that are good for improving air quality also are good for climate change and are good for our well-being. So by well-being, so if you choose to get out of your car and walk or cycle, you're getting fitter and healthier. You're doing your part to reduce air pollution, and you're reducing the contribution to climate change. So it's just a win-win-win-win-win, and it's good for your mental health, because even 20 minutes in the outdoors per day improves your mood. So you're going to be a nicer person to live with, which is important at the moment, and work with.
Okay, great. We have a couple of questions that have come in. The first one has to do with diet. So our first questioner says, can changes in diet and from food production affect air quality worldwide? Maybe Tara, I'll put that one to you first. Can agricultural production and changes there help improve air quality?
Yes, because there's this link between fertilizer and air pollution. So our farmers around the world have a job to do to try and reduce the ammonia that is given off when we spray slurry on the land. So we have a big livestock population here in Ireland. They poop a lot. We gather that together in slurry tanks and then we spread that on the land. And the way we spread it is literally we spread it. You'll have seen it out behind a tractor and a spreader, and it's spraying this arc of slurry out over the land. But while it does that, the slurry is spread and interacts with the air and releases ammonia gas, which is a really dangerous air pollutant. So what our farmers have to do now is find better ways of managing that slurry. And some of that is literally just a different kind of contraption for spreading the slurry, which actually puts it down into the ground through this thing called a trailing shoe, which goes behind the tractor instead. But those things cost more money than the older method, but that is a really quick change that we could make that would reduce the emissions, air pollution emissions associated with agricultural production. And then for those of us in our homes, the key thing we can remember too is not to be throwing any food away. Methane, not so much an air pollutant, but a really potent greenhouse gas, is given away when we leave food and organic matter to rot in our landfill. So anything we can do to reduce food waste is good. And you know, just like John was saying, this whole thing of looking at what we can do from home and within our own homes is a really important thing. So a bit of a plug, that's what this book, How to Save Your Planet One Object at a Time, is all about. I am not a visual person or artistic, a bit like Robin, and I am a bit of a words person, but this is everyday words and everyday actions and nice pictures to help people figure out the answers to these things around what can they do. And like NASA, but on a way smaller scale, Change by Degrees has a How to Save Your Planet from Home little set of 6 challenges that are up on our YouTube channel if people are looking for things and activities to do with their kids in these coming weeks.
Okay, great. We have another question that's come in that says, Ireland's airspace is packed with airplanes going from Middle East through mainland Europe to America. Is there any research on the effect of plane emissions on air quality, and can they affect us at a ground level? John, I might ask you that one a bit, both the 2 questions that have been asked there, but also, are you able to observe through your satellites emissions that are coming from air flights?
Well, we're able to observe emissions at a resolution around urban areas. And so if there are several airports in an urban area, we can get down to a resolution for very large airports, be able to look at air quality changes in those areas. Because typically we're taking observations at a several hundred meter to a kilometer level. So very large airports like in the United States, JFK, LaGuardia, you might can see from satellite changes in air quality around those areas. But we are able to synthesize that orbital data that we get with ground data, because you have to have satellite data is a very important piece of this air quality puzzle, but it's just one piece of the puzzle. It's not an answer to everything. You have to have environmental observations all the way from ground to orbit, as we say, and synthesize that data together. So we're lucky in the United States to have a very robust air quality ground monitoring system run by the states and by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. So through that data, we are also able to continuously monitor air quality changes around our airports in major cities across the country.
Okay, great. And another question that came in then is based on the positive changes that Milan has made in pedestrianizing streets during the pandemic, can any of the panelists identify solutions that the Irish government or other governments could address after the pandemic? Robin, I might come to you on that one again. You'd mentioned maybe working from home earlier on. Is there any other solutions that you might think would be good?
I think, increasing access to public transport, the same stuff that they did in Kampala, the sort of the changes that you make that make the biggest difference are improving the quality of your fleet of cars. So that would be the gradual move to electric, increasing access to public transport, making the roads safer for cyclists, and increasing sort of the pedestrianisation of public spaces are the big changes that governments can make anywhere to improve air quality.
When I attended the COP conference over in Bonn a few years ago, they made public transport free for the entire duration, and it meant for a big uptake in public transport. Do you think that possibly that could be a route to go, is make public transport so cheap or free that more people use it?
I think that would be, that would be a great way to go. I think it's going to be really tough, sort of post-COVID, or sort of when we're still managing that. I think there's going to be a tension between sort of the desire to use public transport and then the desire to be sort of in a shared space where lots of people have been touching the same stuff. But certainly over the longer term, yeah, if we could move to free public transport, that would make a huge difference.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I want to wrap up by looking to the future. I want to see how we should focus our efforts to improve air quality going forward. So, John, to finish up with you on that, how can further progress be made on air quality, and what can we expect in the coming years?
Well, we are very excited here at NASA of a new air quality satellite that will be launched in the coming years, because as robust and amazing as the constellation of Earth observing satellites that we have in orbit are currently, we always have to strive to keep that a robust constellation, because satellites don't last forever. And we also want to bring new technologies to orbit. So in 2022, NASA is going to launch a new air quality satellite called TEMPO. It stands for Tropospheric Emissions Monitoring of Pollution. And this will be our first air quality satellite in geostationary orbit, which means that it will be always staring, if the satellite's in geostationary orbit, it's always staring at one point on the Earth. And TEMPO will be always staring at the greater North America. It'll be staring at greater North America 24 hours a day, but its observations will be taken in the daylight hours. And this mission, TEMPO, is going to be studying ozone, NO2, and formaldehyde, and how it changes diurnally from daybreak to sunset across the country, and how those pollutants are transported across the country. What makes it even more exciting that we're going to start getting those hour by hour measurements of the very air we breathe from TEMPO starting in 2022 is that it will join an international effort to look at air pollution across the Northern Hemisphere. Earlier this year, the Korean Space Agency launched a very similar satellite to geostationary orbit to look at air quality across East Asia. And in 2022, the European Space Agency will launch a very similar satellite known as Copernicus Sentinel-4. And that will be looking at air quality across Europe and North Africa. So those three satellites joining in Constellation will be able to give us unprecedented views of air quality and air pollutants and how they are moving across the Northern Hemisphere. So we're extremely excited by that. And that's going to be a revolution in how we view our planet and air pollution. And also, I would like to point out, and I'd also like to point out that all of NASA's observations and all of our satellite data is free. It's free to the globe, no matter where you are. And people can access that data for research, for any type of decision or policies that they're wanting to investigate. They can access that data at earthdata.nasa.gov. And that's the web portal to access all of our satellite data that has been collected over the past several decades.
Well, we look forward to seeing all that data as it is developed. Tara, do you have any practical tips that people could take away today for them to take immediate action in their locality to try and improve air quality?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're an individual, there are two things. Like every time you don't drive your car is a bonus. So every time you walk to the shop, walk your kids to school, cycle instead, that's a positive thing. So keep doing that. I think for our local authorities around Ireland, a key thing that we need is more footpaths. In my town, only one of the schools in my town out of 5 or 6 schools has a path that goes to the school. So how can we get children to walk to school if there's no path? So one of my basic, simple asks is more footpaths. At the moment, we see more people riding their bikes. My 9-year-old can safely cycle from one side of the town to the other here at the moment because there aren't so many cars and it's safer. Imagine if it was like that all the time. So whilst electric vehicles are going to be part of the solution for transport, we don't want to still have congested towns. We do need to get cars off the road, and more cycling, more walking, and more public transport is going to be at the heart of that. And then another action for those of us here in Ireland, less so at the moment as spring is around the corner, but if we can all think about no more coal, no more turf, no more briquettes, in our fires, that would be great. If you have to choose a wood burning stove and burn dry wood, that is going to produce the least possible air pollution. But everything else we put in an open fire or in a stove creates air pollution. And if you step outside on a cold night and smell fires, then think about what that's doing to your lungs.
Okay, great. And Robin, looking to the future in the developing world where you've done so much work, is there a reason to believe that they won't have to suffer the same levels of air pollution that we saw here in the West as a result of industrialization?
I think there's the benefit of hindsight. So I think the countries that are rapidly industrializing at the moment sort of benefit from the sort of what happened in London, sort of getting really bad with the smog and then having a Clean Air Act and getting better. And then sort of Mexico City being declared the most polluted in the world in '93, and then sort of slowly increasing their air quality through bringing in the right kind of laws and crucially enforcing them. So I think that there is a genuine hope that those countries sort of start to sort of carry on increasing their GDP and sort of their quality of living without degrading their environment alongside doing that, and sort of tunnel through the regular curve that countries sort of in the past have fallen along, where they sort of increase their GDP at the degradation of their environment until they reach a certain point and then come down the other side. And the hope is that they'll be able to sort of take from lessons that have occurred around the world, and be able to sort of tunnel through that curve rather than ride across the top of it.
And use hopefully technologies that didn't exist back then as well, all sorts of clean energy technologies.
Yeah.
Great. Well, that's certainly some food for thought for all of us on air pollution and how we can continue the great advances that have already been made. And we're going to wrap up now. So I want to thank John Haynes, Robin Price, and Tara Shine for their really informative contributions. And we hope you enjoyed this Earth Day event from the Science Gallery, and do keep an eye out for other online events happening throughout the day and later in the week. You can watch this event back on YouTube, and we've included some links to different things we were discussing in the comment section below, as well as links to the bios of each of our speakers. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.